name is Emily Kosmala. I'm a junior here at UNC. I'm honored to share my brother Andy and the incredible journey he walked here with y'all tonight. We found out that he had a brain tumor in 2007, but a lot happened around this time in 2008. He was 12 at the time, I was 15, and my other brothers, Daniel and Matthew, were 9 and 6. So I always start the story by painting a picture of our family at the time. It was a beautiful October day in the mountains. The leaves were vibrant against the brilliant blue sky. Andy fell and hit his head while we were hiking, which in itself was unremarkable at first. Later, as we gathered around the fire pit down by the creek with the trees arching overhead, Andy mentioned seeing in double vision, no doubt a result of the fall, we assumed. I remember Mom and Dad crowding around him, holding up their fingers. "We get it checked out Monday morning," Mom assured us. Were they worried? We couldn't tell. But everything was about to change. But all that mattered at that moment in time was that we were our family, and this is where Andy's story begins. Andy's worrisome double vision sparked a flurry of activity. First, Mom took Andy to see a pediatrician and an optometrist. The optometrist was quick to raise the red flag. His double vision was caused by pressure in the occipital lobe in the back of his head, which is the visual processing part of the brain. Y'all psychology majors will know that. Andy started to get painful, splitting headaches, and it was quickly determined that there was swelling in his brain, and he was in and out of the Charlotte Hospital, CMC, for all sorts of scans and tests. Grandma and Grandpa came down from New York to watch us, so Mom could tend to Andy's endless rounds of appointments and hospital visits. The doctors had no idea what caused the swelling. Talk oscillated between random infections like encephalitis, Lyme's disease, cancer, or overconsumption of vitamin A from eating too many carrots. Brain tumors were stories you read about, though, in Chicken Soup for the Soul, right? Andy's symptoms were alleviated by lying down or keeping his lead level, so he crawled on his hands and knees to get around. And what I remember most clearly from this period of uncertainty was him crawling around on the hardwood floors of our living room, scooting around on my volleyball knee pads. It got scary real quick once he started having seizures. Doctors administered spinal taps, removing spinal fluid to try to get a diagnosis. Spinal taps were extremely painful, but seemed to alleviate the symptoms by decreasing the pressure in his brain, but only briefly, for about 18 hours, and Andy would start to deteriorate again, and he kept having seizures. Friends in our community ordered royal blue wristbands that said, "Pray for Andy." We couldn't keep enough of them around, they were gone so fast, and we sold those and the profits went to St. Jude. In mid-November, all of a sudden, a cranial biopsy, which was the dead last resort, according to my dad, became the only option, because they still didn't know what was going on. I remember the little details about this because it was so surreal the day we got the biopsy results in. It was one of those bone-chilling gray days. My 12-year-old brother Andy had a brain tumor. It was malignant and inoperable. The shape was extremely rare, according to my dad. Instead of a lump on the outside of his brain, Andy's had little finger-like protrusions that went deep inside his brain. This made any attempt at a brain operation like slicing through jello, but not like picking through broccoli, like you can imagine. And most brain surgeries are done with the patient conscious so that the doctor can hear them talk and know if they're slicing something important. So surreal. I have 3 little brothers, and all of a sudden, one had a brain tumor. Home to deal with the magnitude of this new reality, Aunt Lynn started a Caring Bridge website where people could check for updates so we didn't have to keep telling them. And there, Andy posted silly and lighthearted stories about his condition, and people wrote on his wall. Caring Bridge is kind of like Facebook for the terminally ill. Our whole extended family came to Durham for Thanksgiving that year, and in the midst of the bustle, Andy wandered around, his gaunt little face amplified by giant corrective glasses to help with the double vision. Don't remember much interaction with him, but our family dynamic could be summarized in this perfect picture of the 4 of us. I'm stroking Matthew's hair, looking down while Daniel's laughing and pulling on Matthew's ears, and Andy is beside us, gazing directly at the camera with a "see what I have to live with" look on his face. It was like Andy was already becoming separate from us, already a little wiser and touched by grace after his time waiting through the uncertainty in the hospital. The time, 12:34, morning or night, was Andy's favorite time of the day. Also 11:11, 4:56, 3:45, and so on. Time becomes significant when you're waiting for such a long period and when you might have less of it than others. Andy would be in radiation until around Christmas time and chemotherapy for the next year on an official St. Jude protocol for an unconventional stem cell treatment. But before any cancer treatment was done, doctors harvested Andy's stem cells. Little Andy was hooked up to a machine, like a washing machine that cycled all the blood from his body a total of 6 times. Andy was so cold. He was a scrawny 12-year-old at the time, not swollen from radiation yet. They were there for hours, piling blankets on him and praying. Chemotherapy was another radical aspect. Doctors would administer 4 life-debilitating doses of chemo 1 month apart. He was going to have a port installed, which was a direct line to his heart, because the terrible drugs they gave him were burning out the veins of both arms. We didn't hear him complain, though. He took it all with grace and even politeness. The idea of chemo was to bring Andy's immune system to 0 white blood cells to kill the cancer, at which point he would receive his own stem cells to resuscitate him. It should have been scary, but there were many signs that gave Andy hope and that gave us hope. On the Caring Bridge website, Aunt Lynn posted a request for people to trace their handprint to write a prayer or a word of encouragement in the palm. This was a tangible way for people to show Andy was in their thoughts. Hands started pouring in, and they would string them up around the townhouse like Christmas garlands. We'd open boxes with hands from whole families and hands from whole churches. Some other things seemed positively miraculous. Once, during a seizure, Andy started to speak in another language and say the word Genesis. It sounded like he was speaking Hebrew. Andy stopped speaking the minute my dad tried to record it on his cell phone, and Andy didn't remember any of it when he woke up. Andy also saw regular hallucinations, in particular a tall, strong, bald man whenever he looked at tall white things. Later, this figure visited him in dreams and revealed that he was Jacob, a biblical figure. Andy also saw an enormous, gentle lion with him during radiation. The movie Narnia was in the theaters at the time, and although Andy was never told a name, we felt pretty comfortable relating him to Aslan. But this is the coolest. So imagine Christmas season, short days, long nights, the soft glow of white Christmas lights. Advent is the season of quiet waiting. One dark night on the way home from treatment, Andy had a dream. He was asleep in the front seat and woke up suddenly. Mom, I need a pencil." "What, Andy?" Mom asked, alarmed. "Do I need to pull over and call the doctors?" She thought he was having another seizure. "No, I'm okay, I just need a pencil. Mom, can you spell the word Malzarej?" In the midst of us decorating the house for Christmas back home, Mom and Andy burst in the door with a sheet of paper. "Look at these words, do you know what they mean?" And you wouldn't believe this dream. I took one look at the words, Dogaval and Malzarej, and recognized them immediately. And now listen to this dream. Andy was at our church at a special mass for the anointing of the sick, which is a sacrament he'd been receiving with some regularity. There were lots of very nice people, a manger scene with real animals, a burning rose bush off in the corner, and among the animals, 2 spoke to Andy. A sheep came up and told him, "You know how the word Popeyes, also of Popeye's chicken, can be read Pope, yes? If you can see that, you should be able to notice the word Dogaval. Never forget this word. It'll make you happy one day." The dove told him to remember the word Melazarej and study it just like Dogaval. One of the nice people came to tell him that Jacob was standing beside him. The burning rose bush was put in the back of the CRV, and that's when Andy woke up. Dogaval, Melazarej, it's backwards. Love God, Jerusalem. We read English from left to right. What languages are read from right to left? Chinese and Hebrew. We didn't even think Andy knew what Jerusalem was, much less how to spell it backwards. So, Andy began radiation treatment. His face and his body swelled with steroid use. He got big. Andy found the first chunk of shaggy preteen hair on his pillow Christmas Eve. None of these major, potentially tragic milestones, however, affected his jovial good mood. His appetite, stimulated by steroids and radiation combination, was best satiated by hot fudge sundaes and outings to Red Lobster. He took positive delight in selecting the biggest, meanest lobster from the tank. I think it had something to do with Andy's sense of justice. He joked about pulling the cancer card, wearing a hat during church. We'd laugh about his big belly, and he'd laugh about the baby moving, and that would make us all laugh and his belly jiggle even more. Radiation was over with the holidays, and the best Christmas gift anyone could have ever given us was that the tumor had significantly shrunk. So in early 2008, Andy's miraculous story of hope was spreading, and the hands just kept pouring in. Andy was in chemo every day, no days off. Dad was in the pattern of being in Durham on the weekend and sometimes took off Wednesdays to see Andy midweek. He says the exponential increases of hands for Andy was positively overwhelming. The number of hands went from dozens to hundreds to tens of thousands, right past the thousands, Dad says. All of a sudden, they were everywhere. And it wasn't strings anymore. Entire walls were covered in colorful paper prayers. Before we knew it, the movement that had started in our network of family and friends went global. We received hands from different continents: Europe, Africa, Asia, South America, Antarctica, and the last holdout was Australia, but Uncle Steve hooked us up and the Aussies came through too. It really started to become clear. Quiet strength speaks volumes. Andy's message of hope and grace was spreading all over the earth, spurring people across 7 continents to seriously consider their faith in new ways. But back in our community, East Lincoln's Relay for Life, which is one of the largest in the greater Charlotte area, started to mobilize in Andy's honor this year. My high school soccer team kicked off the season hosting our annual tournament, only this year it took on new meaning. It was now called the Andy Kosmala Invitational Tournament. For the first time, all the profits from hosting the tournament were donated to St. Jude in Andy's name. I couldn't have felt more uplifted from seeing the support of dear friends parading around with donation buckets and taping their shins with the slogan 4-8K, like 4 for the 4 Kosmala kids. Andy was there, home from his first round of chemo treatments, bundled up like a little marshmallow, chubby face beaming between scarves and hats. But not to get caught reminiscing about high school soccer here, just trying to convey the feel, the flavor of the season, which became more than about soccer. I think it had something to do with us seeing this chubby little kid at our season opener tournament that really set us up to be working tirelessly against adversity. Andy took chemo like a champ, nausea, spewing from both ends because of the poison in his system. Andy made it through the second round of chemo, much like the first, lots of laughter and chocolate ice cream. There was a volunteer guy who played Weird Al Yankovic's song, Yoda, Andy loved. So, brain cancer is an orphan disease, which means that unlike relatively curable types like breast cancer, companies don't have motivation to invest serious R&D in developing drugs to fight brain tumors. To raise money specifically for brain cancer research, Duke hosts the Angels Among Us 5K, which I run every year. It's coming up on April 20th if anyone's interested. But back in 2008, my family was at this race, but Dad was in the hospital with Andy, of course. I remember being out under the hot April sun when Mom got the call. Blood drained from her face. Andy's cell counts were in, and they weren't looking good. April 25th marked the beginning of a 2-week period where dates stand out. April 25th, April 28th, May 2nd, May 5th. Will this be the day I'll remember as the day my brother died? You feel so alone because everyone knows your brother is dying, but no one knows quite what to say. Can't imagine how he or my parents felt. Those 2 weeks were the worst in my life. I remember checking my phone every water break at soccer practice for bad news. At this time, my team lifted me so I could be a light for my family. The mantra, honor Andy's strength by being strong, came to me one practice and resonated as I repeated it with my family in the heartbreaking days to come. We learned that Andy had a dream he didn't want to share. He was walking through a beautiful place full of beautiful people. He got to the end and met God, who told him he was going to die during chemo. And of course, we said, "No, Andy, it's the cancer that's going to die, not you." But my parents passed this along to the chief oncologist, and his reply was, "The young ones often know." Even as the worst started to sink in, we still couldn't believe it. Things went from upbeat and hopeful to tragic in mere moments. We prayed for a miracle. Someone started 10 a.m. Andy Hour, where schools and people across the community and across the world, connected by Caring Bridge, stopped in a moment of silence for my brother. My other brothers and I were told 2 weekends in a row this might be our last chance to see Andy. I hated visits to the hospital, which were normally dull, but because even when things are good, what is there to talk about? I mean, these were agonizing though. He was pretty unresponsive at this point, hooked up to an oxygen mask. However, still, Andy's sense of humor shone through the despair. The week of May 5th, which was a Monday, my mom told him that me and my brothers were coming at the end of the week. Andy chuckled and said one word, chaos. That was Monday. Tuesday, Andy sat up in bed and said more lucidly than he'd been in weeks, "God, Jesus, Holy Spirit, they're here in this room." And he put out his hand grasping and said, "Come closer." On Thursday morning, May 8th, both of my parents were in the room with him when he said the words, "I love you, Dad. I love you, Mom." They can't remember who exactly was last, but the fact remains that those were his last words. Friday, May 9th, was the day of East Lincoln's Relay for Life. My brothers and I were out of town, heading up to see Andy like we promised. He was there in his bed, hooked up and oxygenated, sleeping, not awake at least, but the monitors were beeping away with their steady, oddly comforting pulse. And so we did what we would always do. We sat by his bed, talked, told him about our weeks. Daniel probably had some goofy story. When we were done, we gave him a fist bump, said our goodbyes. "Love you, Andy. See you later." We went back to Aunt Lynn's. My other brothers and I, Daniel, Maddie, and I, watched the sun set and the stars come out one by one as we rolled down the hills and the golf course. Later, my parents drove up together. It was weird. I wondered why they were together. I had not seen them together outside of the hospital in 6 months. Because there was always someone with Andy. He was never alone. And that's how I knew that Andy was gone. My parents told us that as we walked out in the hallway, they said the monitor readings were like a countdown, ticking downward. By the time my brothers and I reached the elevator at the end of the hallway, Andy was gone. My soccer team was literally on the track walking a lap together for Andy. Word that Andy had passed swept through the East Lincoln Relay like a wave. The community that had hoped and prayed together for 6 months wept together. We went home. The next day I played in the second round of the state playoffs. Casey scored to win the game in double overtime. I still remember her tears streaming down her face. I asked Andy for a goal, and 700 people packed into our little church next Tuesday, where we celebrated Andy's life in joyous example by asking people to wear bright colors and sing happy songs. I read the eulogy and wanted to leave you with these words that I spoke nearly 5 years ago. We will come out of this wiser and stronger. We can all learn from Andy's experience. I hope to learn Andy's acceptance, to help me learn to accept things that I cannot change. Every time my family travels to the mountains and show our friends how to catch crawdads, we will remember Andy and what he taught us as a family, how he kept his unshakable faith through the most trying times. And love your people like there's no tomorrow. It's our job to pass this knowledge on. We have to be disciples. We have to honor Andy's strength by being strong. UNC, There are so many details that I've left out in order to distill this message for y'all tonight. Please feel free to come talk to me anytime, because what matters is that Andy's message of grace brought a community together all across the world in hope. The hands that poured in from across the globe in all 7 continents, from all 7 continents, still leaves me awestruck. I'm so humbled by the effect of his story and feel compelled to share the significance, and all I know is that Andy's story doesn't end here. We celebrate the cancer survivors who have been called to share their stories of healing. We fight and continue to hope for a cure for this disease that has touched far too many lives. UNC Relay, look what we can accomplish when we come together, and maybe we can cure cancer. Thank you.